South Central's streets have long been marked by fierce battles for loyalty and respect. But when two Crip sets turned against each other, their feud caused a rivalry that became both legendary and deadly. What sparked the split, and what was the ultimate price? This is the story of the deadly rivalry between the 8 Tray Gangsters and the Rollin 90s Crips. The 8 Tray Gangster, also known as 83 Gangster Crips or 8 Tray Gangster Crips, is a prominent African-American street gang based on the west side of South Los Angeles, California. Their origins can be traced back to the early 1970s, branching off from the original West Side Crips. One of their most infamous members was Sanika Shakur, also known as Monster Cody Scott. At just 13 years old, he earned the nickname Monster after a brutal robbery, cementing his reputation as one of South Central Los Angeles's most feared gang members. Later, Shakur chronicled his life in the gang in his book Monster, the autobiography of an LA gang member. According to his account, Rayford Big Sidewinder Miles was credited with starting the gang, breaking away from the West Side Crips. Sidewinder co-founded the set with others like Jeffrey Big Bay Bakett, Cornell Hunchy McKinney, Melvin Skull Farmer, and Jesse Hillbilly Ford. While Skull initially named the group the original Gangster Crips, Sidewinder changed it to 8 Tray Gangster Crips after Skull's arrest, drawing inspiration from 83rd Street. The gang's style became recognizable. They often wore Texas Rangers hats with a large T or Georgetown University apparel featuring the Bulldog mascot. What set them apart even further was their older leadership, with most of their leaders in their late 20s or 30s, a rarity for gang hierarchies. The 8 Tray Gangsters gained a reputation as one of Los Angeles' most dangerous gangs, known for their violence and criminal activity. With over 300 members, their territory covered a significant area from Gage Avenue to Manchester Avenue, and from Van Ness Avenue to Vermont Avenue. This included the infamous intersection of Florence and Normandy, where the LA riots erupted in 1992. The gang's involvement in the riots further cemented their notoriety with televised scenes of violence, including the brutal attack on truck driver Reginald Denny. Their criminal history included some of the city's most horrible crimes. In January 1981, an 8-year-old boy was killed during a gang gunfight, leading to 5 members being sent to prison. More recently, 5 members were sentenced to life in prison for murdering 2 teenage girls in a tragic case of mistaken identity. The intended target was the sister of a drug dealer the gang had an issue with. During sentencing, one of the gang members, Deotri Denard, taunted the victims' families by flashing a gang sign and declaring that gangsterism would continue. The 8 Tray Gangsters were heavily involved in the 1992 LA riots. The chaos and violence that happened saw the gang playing a central role in the unrest. Their actions during the riots and beyond showcased their willingness to engage in extreme violence, from ambushing police officers to stealing weapons from gun shops, fueling their ongoing feuds and criminal enterprises. The gang maintained alliances with other Crips factions like the Avalon Gangster Crips, the Main Street Mafia Crips, and segments of the Hoover Crips, such as the 8 Tray Hoover Crips. Despite their connections, the 8 Trays had long-standing rivalries with many, including the Rollin 90s Crips, Denver Lane Bloods, Crenshaw Mafia Bloods, and even other Crips gangs like the East Coast Crips and Rollin O's. Interestingly, the Rollin 90s Crips were once their allies, fighting together against other gangs. However, by the mid-1980s, the two sets became bitter enemies, marking the beginning of infighting among Crips gangs. This feud sparked conflicts across other Crips factions, with one of them being the Rollin 90s Crips. Now, the Rollin 90s neighborhood Crips are part of a larger group known as the Neighborhood Crips. They were often confused with the Rollin 90s West Coast Crips, a completely separate gang. The Rollin 90s Crips have a significant presence in South Los Angeles, with their territory stretching from Van Ness Avenue to Western Avenue. Their base of operations centers around Jesse Owens Park. However, over time, they expanded beyond Los Angeles, establishing their influence in other parts of the United States. There are some debates about their origins. Some claim they broke away from the Rollin 90s Crips, while others believe they had formed independently before joining forces with the Rollin 90s at a party in 1983. It was said they noticed both gangs' names ended with 0 and decided to ally. This bond extended to other gangs, like the Rollin 40s Crips. The Rollin 90s Crips are among the most active gangs, using social media to flaunt their activities, including displays of firearms, drugs, and other criminal exploits. They revel in showcasing their lifestyle for all to see. They have distinct colors, hand signs, and symbols. Blue is their primary color, a tribute to a member named Buddha who was killed in 1973. Buddha was known for wearing blue shirts, khaki pants, blue shoes, and a blue bandana. In his memory, blue became the signature color of the Crips. Members also sported North Carolina hats, with the NC standing for 90 Crips. Through their colors and graffiti, they marked their territory and asserted dominance, using these symbols to intimidate others. A well-known rivalry between the Rollin 60s Crips and the 8 Tray Crips began over a dispute involving a girl. What started as a personal argument between two members escalated into a larger conflict, forcing other gangs to take sides. The Rollin 90s aligned themselves with the Rollin 60s in this feud. Unfortunately, this allegiance brought the Rollin 90s into direct conflict with the 8 Tray Gangsters. But this violent rivalry wasn't just about turf. It turned deadly one fateful evening in 2003. On August 12, 2003, around 7:40 p.m., three men, Henrico, Douglas, and James, were at an Arco gas station on 76th Street and Western Avenue, filling up their Chevy Nova. This gas station was located in the territory of the 8 Tray Gangster Crips, who were locked in a heated rivalry with the Rollin 90s neighborhood Crips. While Henrico and Douglas weren't affiliated with any gang, James was a member of the Rollin 90s Crips. He stood out that evening wearing an Allen Iverson jersey, a style often associated with the 8 Tray Gangster Crips. As they filled their tank, a black Ford Escort pulled into the station, driven by Jones. From the car, a passenger shouted a provocative insult, calling out, "This is 90s," a direct challenge to their rivals. Sensing trouble, Henrico, Douglas, and James got back into their Chevy Nova and left the gas station, turning onto Florence Avenue. Jones followed closely in his Escort, catching up to them. He flashed gang signs, escalating the tension, and then his passenger pulled out a gun and fired 13 shots at the Nova. The sudden attack forced Henrico to swerve into oncoming traffic in a desperate attempt to escape. The car collided with another vehicle, but managed to make a left turn onto Florence Street. Amid the chaos, Douglas Watson was struck in the head and killed. Kenneth, another driver who had been attempting to make a left turn nearby, was hit in the shoulder by a stray bullet. Henrico, James, and Kenneth survived the shooting and later provided testimony against Jones in court. Around 12:30 in the morning on August 16, 2003, two detectives, Jolivet and Fallon, sat down with Jones at the police station for an interview that lasted about 2 hours. At the start, they asked him why he thought he was there. Jones said the police had shown up at his house and told him he had to come in to answer some questions. The detectives wasted no time laying down the pressure. They told Jones this was his one shot to talk to them, and that refusing to cooperate or lying would only make things worse. After reading him his Miranda rights, which he said he understood, they made it clear that if his story didn't match what they already believed, there would be problems. To ramp up the pressure, they lied, claiming there was video evidence placing Jones's car near the gas station at the time of the shooting. They also suggested that other drivers had seen his car at the scene, even though none of that was true. When Jones denied driving the car, the detectives pushed harder, asking if he was trying to make things worse for himself. They told him to stop making excuses and come clean, warning that things wouldn't end well if he didn't. The intimidation kept escalating. They painted a grim picture, saying Jones was standing on the edge of a cliff and needed to decide how to save himself. They warned him that staying quiet would lead to a long ride he couldn't turn back from, and as a 19-year-old, that could mean a long time in prison. The detectives also tried to frame the situation like Jones wasn't the main focus. They told him he wouldn't face serious trouble if he admitted to just driving the car, emphasizing that the shooter was the one truly responsible. They reassured him that being the driver wasn't a big deal and pushed him to admit he had been there, but didn't know about the shooting in advance. They claimed they were trying to help him out, making it seem like cooperation was his best option. After the interview, the police let Jones go. However, on October 19, 2003, around 8:30 p.m., Detectives Jolivet and Hollyfield sat down with Jones for another interview. This time, Detective Hollyfield started by reading Jones his Miranda rights, which Jones said that he understood. When the questioning began, Jones admitted that he owned a 1995 black Ford Escort. At that point, Detective Jolivet informed Jones he was under arrest for murder and made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. Jolivet reminded Jones that he had been given a chance to tell his side of the story earlier, but didn't come clean. He told Jones to start telling the truth if he wanted any hope of going free, but made sure Jones knew there were no promises. Initially, Jones denied being present during the shooting, but Jolivet pressed him, pointing out that Jones had already said otherwise in a previous statement. Jones continued to deny it, but Jolivet insisted they had it on tape. When the detective asked if Jones was claiming he hadn't been carjacked, Jones finally admitted he was at the gas station when the shooting happened. Jones claimed that a sweaty, angry man with a gun had jumped into his car and forced him to drive, saying the man was upset about being beaten up by someone. According to Jones, when they got to Florence and Western, this man started shooting before jumping out of the car. Jones explained that he hadn't told the police this story earlier because the man hadn't harmed him. Despite this explanation, the detectives didn't believe him. During Jones's second trial, prosecutors used a partially redacted audio recording of this interview. Portions of the transcript were removed, including page numbers, personal details about Jones, and comments the detectives made about his prior statements and the arrest warrant. Parts where the detectives expressed disbelief in Jones's story were also redacted. While the full audio recording wasn't included in the court files, the jury was played the edited version during the trial. At the conclusion of the second trial, the jury found Jones guilty on all charges. They also determined that he was involved with a gang and had used a gun during the crime. On November 17, 2017, the judge sentenced Jones to 10 years in prison, followed by an additional 50 years to life. Fast forward 7 years, and the violence hadn't stopped. In fact, it claimed another young life. On the evening of December 29, 2010, 14-year-old Taburi Watson was shot and killed near St. Andrews Park in South Los Angeles. No one actually saw the shooting, but several people in the area heard a rapid series of gunshots. Fanta had just gotten home when the shots rang out. She immediately dropped to the floor and stayed there until things went quiet. When she felt it was safe, she crawled to her window and looked outside. At the corner of 87th Street and St. Andrews Place, she spotted a bicycle lying in the street. Miss A, another resident, saw a dark-colored car, possibly from the late 90s or early 2000s, make a U-turn on St. Andrews Place. Even though it was cold, the car's windows were rolled down. She couldn't make out the faces clearly, but she noticed a light-skinned man sitting in the passenger seat, someone who resembled her. She also thought someone else was in the back seat. The passengers seemed to be looking at something, so Miss A stepped outside to see what had caught their attention. That's when she saw Taburi's body lying on her neighbor's lawn. Johnny M. was working at St. Andrews Park that evening and heard the gunshots around 7:15 or 7:30. He stayed in his office for a moment, then went outside. When he did, he saw Taburi lying in the yard and a bicycle in the street. A car was coming down the road, so he stopped it to move the bike out of the way. Taburi was moaning softly, but wasn't moving. Johnny also noticed two people walking south on St. Andrews Place, about 100 yards away. Two police officers were patrolling nearby when they heard the gunshots. Knowing the park was a gang hangout, they drove slowly toward it, looking for any sign of trouble. Three people pointed them toward the scene, where they found a woman signaling to a body lying face down on the lawn. Taburi was bleeding heavily, barely breathing. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't survive. Investigators recovered 7 spent bullets from a .45 caliber handgun, likely a Glock, though the weapon itself was never found. Taburi had been shot 4 times. One bullet entered his upper back, traveled through his right lung, and exited through his neck, suggesting the shot came from below. Police suspected the murder was gang-related. The location, the circumstances, and the clothes Taburi was wearing all pointed to gang ties. He wore a black beanie with the letters TIP, standing for Tray and Peace, a reference to the 8 Tray gang known to frequent the park. A detective had even spoken with Taburi earlier that day. Taburi admitted to being in a gang and had been with another 8 Tray member when that individual was arrested. The killing also seemed connected to a string of shootings that month, tied to the ongoing rivalry between the 8 Tray gang and the Rollin 90s gang. For nearly 2 months, the case remained unsolved. Then in late February 2011, a woman named CW contacted the police with information. She shared details about the murder and another gang shooting that had taken place a few weeks earlier. CW revealed what she had learned from her then boyfriend, Theron Shakir, a member of the Rollin 90s gang. According to her, Shakir confessed that he and Timothy Lee Allen had killed Taburi Watson. Marcus Benz had allegedly driven them to the park to target a rival gang member and pick them up afterward. CW explained the context of her relationship with Shakir leading up to the murder. Things between them had been rocky in early December. They argued constantly, and CW grew frustrated with his lack of attention to her and their baby, especially since he had children with other women. During one heated argument, CW stabbed Shakir in the arm. He drove himself and a friend, Brandon Warren, to the hospital in a rented black car. After the hospital visit, Shakir couldn't drive, so another woman, the mother of one of his other children, picked him up. Brandon Warren drove the rental car, but was later shot while driving. By the end of 2010, CW and Shakir were still loosely involved, dating on and off and living together from time to time. But their relationship was strained. Officer Arnold and Detective Ferreira recorded the interview where CW recounted details of another shooting that preceded the killing of Taburi Watson. She explained that the earlier shooting had taken place in 8 Tray territory and that Watson's murder was an act of revenge. CW admitted she learned about the murder from others, and by looking it up online, she described the victim as a young boy on a bike and expressed how shaken she felt when she realized his age. She explained that she was terrified because she knew where the men involved lived and feared their dangerous reputation. She detailed how the 3 men drove to a park in a blue Kia, got out, and confronted the boy on the bike. After asking him where he was from, the boy tried to run, but they shot him. 2 of the men carried guns while the 3rd stayed in the car. CW identified her ex-boyfriend, Theron Shakir, as one of the men involved. She also named Timothy Lee Allen and Marcus Benz as participants. She explained her close relationship with Shakir, saying he often shared details about his activities, even earning the nickname Pillow Talk because he talked in his sleep. She expressed fear that if her involvement as an informant became known, they would retaliate. CW recalled that Shakir and the others returned to her apartment after the murder. She noticed their strange behavior, especially when they suggested she turn on the news. Later that night, Shakir admitted to her what had happened. They parked the car, walked through the park, saw the boy, and shot him when he tried to flee. Shakir mentioned using a revolver, while another gun, possibly a 9mm, was also involved. CW stated that Shakir and his friend tried to hide the weapons, likely burying them near Benz's house. CW provided further details, including how she recognized the location of the shooting through images online. She said Shakir described the victim pleading for his life, repeatedly saying he was sorry before they shot him. The events deeply unsettled her, and she feared the police would raid her home. On March 29, 2011, CW met with the police again and shared her story once more. She confirmed that the victim was affiliated with the 8 Tray gang and mentioned that Shakir referred to him as a tramp, a derogatory term used for members of that gang. Not long after, Shakir was arrested and sent to jail. As for Timothy Lee Allen, Shakir's accomplice, his arrest came much later, September 2015 to be exact. He faced several charges, including the murder of Taburi Watson, possession of a firearm as a convicted felon, and other offenses tied to an earlier robbery conviction. His first trial ended in a mistrial after the jury couldn't agree on a verdict, but in a second trial, the outcome was different. At the second trial, CW testified that she had fabricated the entire story she told the police. She claimed she had pieced the details together from news reports and online information. She admitted that her accusations against Shakir, Benz, and Lil Grape were motivated by anger and resentment toward Shakir, particularly due to personal problems in their relationship and their child's health issues. CW and Shakir had no contact for 6 months following her police statements, except for one phone call from jail where Shakir accused her of being the person who implicated him. Detective Sean Hansen, an expert in cell phone tracking, presented evidence at the trial. showing the movements of phones belonging to Allen, Shakir, and Benz on the night of the murder. The data placed them near the crime scene and later in areas associated with Benz and CW. Timothy Lee Allen did not deny his involvement with the Rollin 90s gang. The gang expert who testified confirmed the affiliations of Allen and Shakir and explained the violent rivalry between the Rollin 90s and the 8 Tray Crips. The expert stated that the murder was likely an act of revenge tied to this gang conflict. The jury found Timothy Lee Allen guilty of first-degree murder, possession of a firearm as a felon, and participation in a gang-related crime. On October 26, 2016, he was sentenced to 80 years to life in prison. Appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.